Testing one.
Let's try a fresh batch.
Yeah, it's got brand new batch physics yesterday.
Yeah.
And I can see you when you're tapping it.
Testing 1, 2.
What have we got? Oh, we got no. Oh. What have we done?
Nothing. So that should be on. Tap it now.
Testing 1, 2.
Yeah, but it's got no audio.
It's up there. Something disconnected.
Good evening, everyone. I don't know if you'll be able to hear me. We've just got a bit of a glitch with the mic at the moment. I will endeavour to speak clearly. Not my normal behaving. I'm always a bit of a rush. And I am, for those of you who don't know me, that I think we have visitors here tonight. I've met two already. Julie and Connor, welcome. Do you have any other visitors? Welcome. I hope you enjoy the evening. With your mum. Just a few things before we start. The toilets are still where they were last week, over in the far corner on the rides. Fire escapes, I think, are out back here or out through the front door. Please turn your fans off or put them on silence. Make sure you have them ready. And we'll get started. Before we go into business, I'll just get Alistair to pop up and just look at the introduce that. You want to do it afterwards? All right, okay. Just put it in the wrong place. Apologies.
prints right at the end, the sepia and monochrome prints. They were entered in open competitions at CPS in the very early 1970s. And included in them, this was my first ever girlfriend who I met after I joined CPS, so I had to photograph her with her girlfriend. These were guys I worked with, and it was the time of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the movie, and so this is made from a paper negative and printed. And then these prints from here on are all more recent prints. A lot of them have been done in Photoshop, where they are multiple images. Some of them, by today's standards, are a bit gimmicky, but 20 years ago they were something that was quite new. And I won't go and talk about each individual print, but do take some time to have a look at them. There are one or two interesting techniques that have been used. The guy was photographed in Los Angeles, the girl in the South Island. This was when I was with Newell Grenfell, and he was asked if he would do a donator's time for a week and travel around the South Island, follow these bikes, and do some photography, which we were going to donate. We both donated the photography. It raised over $40,000, our photography did, for charity. And in addition to that, I got the chance to ride in a helicopter because Newell didn't want to. And this was taken at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I'd got to know the helicopter pilot fairly well, and I could say to him, look, just move up another 20 feet, move the helicopter around 15 degrees. I said, I think I've got my angle right now, just wait for the bikes to come. And of course, the shadows were just magnificent. The judge said, quite like this print, I think it's a shame that the photographer then manipulated it by putting in shadows for each bike. And I thought, get real. Waimate, various other prints here that I've taken. There did printing and particularly concentrated on the whites of the eyes of the girls. One of the original prints that I did when you first could start doing printing on your own digital printer at home. By today's standard, it's fairly weak, but it was a nice print to start with. This one here is actually a photograph of myself, and I took that by parking the car there, putting the camera on a tripod across the road, got back into the car, then took the photograph, and then when I got home, through blur techniques in Photoshop, I then blurred the movement of the car and then concentrated circular blur on the wheels to give the movement in the wheels. So it shows you what you can do if you want to lie. This picture some years ago won the New Brighton 25th Salon, and the prize was a 10-day camper van ride around the South Island to wherever we wanted to go. So that was not a bad price for a competition. Most of the others, this is taken in India, this is taken in Wanaka, and various other photographs are taken in various places. But do have a look at them, enjoy. I'm happy to explain anything further if anybody wants to know how any of the prints were done or how any of the matting was done. The matting has just simply been done professionally for me, and they did a good job at the time. And one of the interesting things you'll notice, and many of you may want to take note of this for your own competition, I decided at the time that I really didn't want to spend or have the money to spend more than a print that was 8 by 12 inches, which is quite a small print. And if you put that on a 16 by 20 or 40 by 50 mount, it looks quite small. So I asked the people who did the matting for me to make the prints 18 inches by 14 inches. So it went okay with the 16 by 20 prints, but it made the print look a lot bigger in the mount with still plenty of border room. But it means that you could produce prints for less than $10. So it's a good way for those of you who are on a budget. That's a really good way of doing it. And of course the matting is cheaper too when it's small. Enough from me. I'll hand back over and enjoy the prints. As I said, I'll be here for as long as anyone wants to ask questions.
Thank you, Ron. I haven't managed to get over there as yet, so I'll wait till the end of the evening and have a look. They look amazing. Varied talent indeed. So now we'll get on to the competition. So I'll ask John if he'd like to come up and introduce our judge for the evening, John Daly.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the PI number 3 landscape and our new judge for the evening, Paul Daly. It's good to see a good number of people here tonight. Paul is a commercial, editorial, landscape and travel photographer, and he's based in Christchurch. He's no stranger to PCS. He's had a lot of he's done a lot of presentations at CPS, and quite a few members of CPS have been through his schooling at Hagley College, me included. Born and raised in Southern Lakes region, Paul moved to Christchurch to advance his photography career. While his commercial and editorial work is mainly South Island based, his landscapes and photography tours are international, and pre-COVID had him leading tours to places such as Turkey, Nepal, Vietnam, Cuba and the Arctic Circle. And I know that at least one CPS member has travelled with Paul on more than one occasion to these exotic locations. Paul is also an accredited member of NZIPP, and up until early last year, he served on the NZIPP Honours Board, which is responsible for running the NZIPP Honours System and the annual Iris Awards. Since retirement from the Honours Board, Paul remains involved in the Iris judging and is a panel chair. Paul has been awarded the Cathay Pacific Travel Photographer of the Year twice, in 2015 and 2017. As many of you will know, Paul also teaches night schools classes in photography and Photoshop at Hagley Community College. And I know that there are a number of Paul's students who have joined CPS and been very successful. Paul also runs group and private seminars in Lightroom, travel and landscape photography, providing one-on-one critiques. Tonight we have 52 images in the competition, and of those, Paul has accepted 7 high acceptances, 5 honours and 1 best in show. I'll pass it over to Paul.
Thank you, John. I'm a bit worried that you already know how many of each thing has been done. Okay. Can that light be turned down a little bit? So like I'm in the dark, so you can't see me. It'll be better for the photos that are on the screen too. So I'll try and keep this as concise as possible. Some notes I've made to myself are a little short and a little I'm going to have to expand on. Others are a little bit longer. Yeah. All right, so we'll get into it. I'm told that this PC, I push this button here. Being a Mac user, it'll probably fail on me straight away. There we go. Okay, trees by the lake. Trees by a lake. Do I have to give the score? Is that what I do? Is that how I do this? Do I have to announce the score? Is it on screen? Oh, it was? Okay. 1. And lovely sky, interesting sky, which the photographer's obviously also quite interested in. And I sort of like struggled a little bit why it's called Trees by the Lake when more of it was involved with the sky. It just seemed to lack a bit of point of focus. Some of the highlights are a little bit gone in it as well. But yeah, it didn't seem to have a real point of focus to me on this particular image. It did have a sort of like a reasonable leading line coming down from those clouds though. As I said, the sky was definitely the most interesting part of it. Right. Oh, there we go. Lighthouse, Echo Lighthouse. All right, unfortunately for this image here, as far as I could see, the exposure on the lighthouse is good, but that's pretty much where it stops. Everything else is in darkness, and in reality, I mean, like these sort of shots, you really need a little bit more interest in the landscape or in the scene. It is basically a single lighthouse lit, and if you shot a little bit closer to dusk or dawn, if it's still going in dawn, then you'll get a little bit more light in the sky, light in the landscape, just a little bit more detail. It's unfortunately it's just a lighthouse hovering in the darkness, pretty much. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so rock and sand, break of day. Okay, once again a score of 1. Reasonable subject and lovely reflection, but a little bit unbalanced on the left-hand side here. Plus, there's no light on the rock there. Well, I have to say that your screen does look a little bit lighter than what I was looking at, but the screen, the rock just didn't really have a huge amount of detail on the screen that I was looking at, and which is a problem with volcanic rock. So normally needs a little bit of attention at the post-production time. Overall, the image looked a little bit flat and a little bit lifeless. I could have done with just a little bit of sort of playing with a bit of curves or something to that effect. Okay, geez, I've done a half an essay on this one. So obviously it's a spectacular location. We're all pretty familiar with this one. And photography's done well with the atmospheric background, but the messy the messy foreground for me was a bit distracting, and as such, the viewer has a bit of trouble making their way through that foreground, sort of cluttery, messy little bits and pieces. I mean, like, what's going on in that background area is actually really quite interesting, but this foreground is really sort of killing it off. I've died. No, I'm back. So maybe just in situations like this, just searching for a slightly cleaner foreground that helps lead you into the image a little bit more. And I've put a note in there, is that horizon straight? I put a quick thing across and it didn't quite seem straight. It's something that we need to sort of like just be a little bit careful of. But just searching for a little bit of a cleaner foreground, and you could go a long way with atmospheric conditions like that in the background. Okay, so we've got a few images that are going to attract similar comments to this one. Lovely spots, reasonable leading line into the shot, using the beach or the line in the beach. I mean, like, you could have cropped it a little bit more and used the line in the surf where it starts there. But the time of the day, it feels like it may have been shot. I don't think it was shot right in the middle of the day, but the colour balance and the amount of light that's in the shot does feel very sort of middle of the day-ish as far as the overall look is concerned. And we really sort of try and avoid that with our landscape photography. It's, maybe shoot black and white at that time. So possibly a little bit of a crop off that bottom and just getting some nice gorgeous light going in there. That will help a lot more in this particular shot. Okay, Canterbury Blight and sunrise. Interesting cloud and textures in the stones. I quite like that texture in the stones, but it's sort of like, once again, it lacks a point of focus. We sort of like meander around through the shot, really sort of like nowhere to look, but looking everywhere type thing. The horizon smack through the middle is a difficult place to put a horizon and get away with it. Try a lower horizon, put a little bit more emphasis on something in the foreground, or go a higher horizon and make something out of the clouds. It's a difficult one, and that sort of like lack of real something to focus in on is something that's caused concern in this one. Okay, all right. It's rather depressing that I start on all the negative ones, isn't it? Can't we throw a good one in? All right, open home. Once again, I've written myself a half an essay here. So, what have I said? Crop is either too tight or not tight enough. It's sort of like with too tight, and you sort of like don't get a real sense of surroundings, you could get in nice and tight and actually play with some of the texture and the detail of the building. The image color balance, once again, is sort of like, it's a little bit middle of the day like, and I even said maybe consider converting this to black and white. It might actually sort of eliminate a little bit of the sort of washed out colors of the background, and sort of I always sort of say shooting through the middle of the day, black and white's always a nice option when you're shooting landscapes in harsh light. Sort of it's one of those conditions that black and white tend to like. So get in a little bit closer or a little bit wider and get a sense of location. It seemed like a sort of like just a little bit of an odd crop. Okay. Right, landscape merging into the sky into and sea. All right, so once again, I know the blueness of the image is what makes the title, and you sort of like get that merging of the sky and whatnot. But the color balance is not that fantastic. It is a little bit on the cold side, the blue side, and it could really do with a little bit of warming up. Think about the time of the day when you're shooting images like this. The composition's also a little bit sort of unresolved. You've got the foreground and you've got the background, but you've got no real sort of connection between the two. It's sort of like there's a bit of foreground and there's a bit of background, but it doesn't sort of like, they don't really connect with each other. So that could be a thought to sort of like just think about your composition there. And any other things here? Yeah, maybe a little bit too much sky, really, even with if you left everything else the same. And something else that I've just noticed, looks like you might have some dust on the sensor, just to boot. All right. Okay, so. Once again, a very interesting location and insanely difficult to photograph. I know this from personal experience. It's sort of like, very difficult sort of thing to frame up and get an image that works. And because of such, it all has a lack of focal point where we're not really led on a journey through. We've got this sort of like area in the foreground, and then we've got that little bit of brightness up in the corner there of the sky, and we sort of like meander through the shot, but we're not really sort of on any sort of purposeful journey through it. It's hard to sort of like say what you could really do with this particular composition to make it any better. Things that are like this and very large can be quite overwhelming to try and photograph. I often sort of like say, concentrate on maybe some of the details as opposed to trying to get the whole thing or go a little bit abstract. And sometimes we get caught into trying to get too much in the frame, try and capture the whole thing, and it sort of like fails a little bit. Didn't do too bad with the exposure though. I mean, like, it's reasonable exposure considering the situation in which it's photographed. Alrighty, here we go again, and the thing I've written here: interesting subject, wrong time of the day. Okay, either consider black and white at this time of the day or a different time of the day. You've got some interesting little bits and pieces going on there, but I'm just sort of like, here I'm just going light, okay, time of the day. It's sort of like it's so important, and just shooting in the middle of the day, it feels like, the photographer has just sort of seen this composition. It's interesting with the foreground elements and whatnot. But it's just sort of like, it feels like the photographer's just rocked on up at that particular time of the day, taken the photo, and not thought about, possibly being able to shoot it again at a different time or something like that. I know that if it's, you're transiting through, you don't really have any options, and that's why I suggest maybe, try black and white or something like that. Rightio. Okay, so interesting subject, but it needs a little bit better control, especially over the highlights. So a few of the highlight areas are sort of like just blowing out. And high key images are great, but you do still need to hold a little bit of detail in highlight areas where you would expect to have stored a little bit of texture or something. Obviously a specular highlight or something like that, it can go, but this one with, it's just in those cloud areas, and I think even on my monitor, some of those top of the mountain bits, but definitely the cloud areas were just, they were Gomberger as far as like any sort of detail or anything in that. I found personally that foreground tuft of grass a little bit, because it's out of focus, a little bit distracting, but that's sort of a side issue. The thing that could probably be corrected easily is just reprocessing it and pulling back those highlights a little bit. You can still get a high key image without the highlights going off the histogram. Okay. All right. So I made an assumption on this one that it's a drone shot. If the photographer's in here and it's not a drone shot, feel free to yell at me. Did somebody yell? I didn't quite find the position that well balanced. I would have actually sort of like just found it sort of like angled around a little bit more, so you had a sort of like a bit more of a, through the frame as far as the angle of the rock's concerned. I'm taking a fairly bold assumption that it is a drone shot. And we just have to think about our drone shots just like we do with our own camera, normal cameras. Really think about our compositions and our lighting. Once again, the lighting here is not that great. The color balance is not that fantastic either. And you just have to really pay a lot of attention to it. Just because it's a drone shot doesn't mean that it's instantly going to be a winner. And I always sort of like think, like my drone shots are always, my drone doesn't have a lot of battery time or flight time. And so I always try and pre-visualize what the shots are that I want to get before I even take off. If you got that in the bag, or if you got that out of the way before you even take off, then you'll often achieve slightly better results. I was also the angle. When you're at this sort of level, a lot of the time you tend to want the horizon in it, but I don't think that would have helped the shot. I think just angling around so you had the rocks sort of in the lower left and through to the upper right might have been a little bit better for it. Yeah. Okay, number one thing I said about this is well done for getting a straight horizon off what I assume is probably a boat, because that can be insanely difficult at times. So that looks great. Felt like, it's a bit hard to sort of see, but the island or the area around the island felt a little bit over-processed. Now, I may have got the complete wrong end of the stick, and that is spray all around it. When I looked at it initially, I sort of like felt, is that haloing or something around the island that is creating that effect? It didn't quite feel 100% natural. I'm happy to be corrected on that. When I look at it on the big screen, it has a slightly different feel about it. But yeah, it just looked like it was processed a little bit too much around that island, which distracted me quite a bit. Possibly didn't really need as much foreground sea either. Okay. Right, unloved urban landscape. All right, interesting subject. Colour is very poppy, but the sky feels a little bit over-processed, a little bit over-blue, and there also looks like there's some sort of haloing or something going on that left side of the building with the sky, where it meets the sky. Possibly cropping was a little bit close to the building as well on that upper side. You could have given it a little bit more without, probably would have helped it a bit. I even thought maybe a square crop or trying black and white, once again, may have sort of helped it. But in the first instance, it just felt like it was possibly just a little bit over-processed, especially that sky just felt quite iridescent, and there was just a little bit of weird haloing going on around the skyline, the top of the sky where it meets the top of the building where it meets the sky. Okay. All right, so interesting sky, and I found a bit of a disconnect between the upper and lower parts of the frame. A bit of a strange one, because it's called Angry Stormy Lake Pukaki, and the sort of like the top part tells that story, but the bottom part's like dead calm. Which sort of like was a bit of a slightly weird, but I almost felt like the sky was too processed, too dark. It could possibly just be pulled back a little bit on that and still it'd be, in my mind, possibly a little bit more successful, because it would then sort of, the lower area, the still area, would it would connect, the two halves would connect a little bit better. It feels like that top half doesn't, and the bottom half don't relate to each other. So, could easily reprocess that one. Whoops. Right. Okay. So, good framing on this particular shot. General colour. Oh God, sorry. This is me going shorthand. Let me just decipher what I've written. All right, so I'll start off with a bit that I can see and is quite obvious in the shot, is that posterization and the gradient around the sun is just, that's not a good thing. Obviously you're not going to expect detail in the sun, but the way that it's posterized out from the sun, especially up through the sky, but also in the highlight and through the water, that is, that hasn't been handled too well in the post-production. So, if this is a shot in raw format, then you can go back and have a good whack at it as far as pulling, reprocessing it. If it's been shot as a JPEG, then you may be having a little bit more difficulty sort of pulling back any detail there, because, well, it's a JPEG. Also, I just sort of thought, I've figured out my shorthand now. This area, I'll point it out. This area here sort of like could possibly be cropped out. The ship on the right on the horizon on the edge there, it's sort of like, do you have that in or do you have it out? It's almost a little bit distracting having that dot right there because it's quite bright and you sort of do end up over there. But yeah, the fundamental problem is that sky, the posterization going through there. Okay. Right. Winter eroding shadows on Chatham Island basalt columns. Gosh, it's a very long title. I've scored it 2. Okay. Recognising the image is well exposed and in good light, and the processing is also really good as far as that is concerned. I find that foreground basalt down the bottom here, the foreground element, a little bit out of focus, a little bit distracting. And I think that it might have, sorry, I'm just reading my notes, and yeah, and it would have probably been a little bit better if it had been in focus. I know that's probably been shot with a longer focal length lens. You're dealing with depth of field and stuff like that, and having to make a decision over one or the other. And you know, in a lot of landscape situations, we like the foreground element to be in focus. Yeah, it seemed a little bit distracting. The level of blur in it, maybe even just sort of like chopping a bit of it off. Being a 2 or a score of 2, you can always do that and represent it. That's the rules, isn't it? You're allowed to, yeah. Right, and in that vein, you know, this is a great study of light. It's called autumn light. So great study of light, and it's a big but, is that the image's color balance is very blue. And I mean, like when we're talking about autumn, we're sort of like thinking about lovely, warm autumn tones and colors and that sort of feel. And it feels like that's what the light should be, but the light is very cold. And all I want in this image, and why I scored it a 2, is to just warm it up and then represent it. I mean, like, it's a lovely study of light and that backlit situation, the shadows, and you just sort of like, it's got layers in there, and yeah, I just want it to be warmer. So if you can warm it up and represent it, yeah, I think you should go. It should be all right. Okay, and then this is another one. Gee, it's almost like all the number 2s are sort of like, you know, make a small adjustment and resubmit. Great subject, you know, interesting little huts and stuff like that. The background lacks a little bit of contrast. Those hills in the background sort of felt like they just needed a little bit more oomph in the contrast. Reprocess it. It feels like it's not quite straight as well. I sort of like tried to figure it out, but it's sort of like, yeah, it feels a little bit downhill, but it could be the landscape. Sometimes in those situations, you still have to possibly just do a little bit of because it's the optical illusion, you have to do a little bit of a straighten just to avoid the optical illusion. Yeah, so maybe that little bit of a straighten, but dealing with a little bit of contrast in those background hills and the sky cloud area probably help it out a bit. Just be careful when you're playing around with the contrast that you don't play around with that the huts too much, because you got that white one, the lighter coloured one, sort of middle left, and that could go overboard if you play with the contrast too much. All right, geez, I've written another novel. Okay, right. And you look at, you know, they always say, don't put things bang in the middle of the image and stuff like that. I don't actually mind the centralized location of this, the centralized composition. I've held it back, hoping that the photographer make a few small adjustments and then reapply. The light is great, but it feels it needs like a little bit more contrast. Your projector's probably doing it a favour, but on this screen and the monitor that I judged it on, which is calibrated by the way, it looked a little bit on the flat side. The rocks could just do a little bit with a little bit of brightness, just lifting a little bit. And photographer just needs to watch the amount of sharpness being applied. You can really see around the edge of I'll take a wander, around the image, a little bit of haloing from the sharpness being pushed right to the nth degree, possibly a little bit too much. I would possibly pull it back a smidge, just for safety's sake. It's obviously sharp. You don't need to overcook the sharpness. Okay. So yeah, have a bit of a play and then bring it back. Okay, so the three sisters. Framing the image and using the landforms works really well. I sort of like thought that was okay. I probably would have come in a little bit closer, however, and cropped from this landform. It would have pulled out a few of the, it looks like vehicle tracks or the messiness and the sand in the foreground. In an ideal world, even the glossiness, it would have pulled you a little bit closer to that glossiness in the sand or from the wet sand. And I'd allow a smidge more of top. Oh, hold on, sorry. I'll read my notes before I just start talking. It's not a good thing. Oh yeah. So, if you'd adjusted or if you have in the original, adjust the crop up a little bit, down on the bottom here, up the top there. That bright bit of sky sort of like leads out. If there's a little bit more, if it happens to be foliage or cloud, just so it doesn't sort of like, you've got this waveform of the cloud, but it sort of like leads off out the top up there. And sort of like just needs a little cap of foliage or cloud. So hopefully maybe that might be there. Yeah. All right, so sunrise through the mist. Okay, there's another great image. The composition is great, and the color is amazing. All right, real autumn. It has those autumn tones and colors. I could almost start. It's going. Where did those leaves come from? Because those trees look actually very green. But that's a thought that I've just come up with. So we'll just bottle that one. The exposure is lovely, but the problem here is it's obvious. I mean, like you can see this haloing stuff going on through here. It's happening in all the bright areas, and I'm not sure what has happened in the processing to do that, but it needs to be rectified. If that's rectified, it's a great image. The colours and the tones, etc., the composition, nice will all wander through, but that technical thing is just holding it back. And so if you can sort that out, just resubmit it. You don't have to do much else apart from that. Yeah, okay. Okay, so here's another image that I really wanted to like because of the exotic location, especially considering none of us have been on jet planes for a little while. The general composition works really well, sort of like having this sort of like leading line through. Struggling a little bit with the brightness of the sky and also the processing of the sky in this bright area, this area up here. It's sort of like, not sure what's going on there, but it's not quite right. And it's, and unfortunately, it looks even worse on the projector image here. So, that needs to be sorted out a little bit. the eye just sort of like rolls too quickly over there. There also seems to be a little bit of an inconsistency with the color balance, obviously from the warmer light at the top there to the light or the color of the village area. And, you know, it doesn't take much to add a little bit of warmth into that village area, even though technically it probably wouldn't have been, if just to sort of like sell the story of the warm glow coming across. That village area could be warmed up just a smidge because there is a real coolness in that area. Okay. Another image that I've held back to 2 so that I can make a couple of changes and resubmit. The image is pretty much there. You know, the composition's really nice. I mean, like, you know, some could argue that there's maybe a smidge too much sky. But I really like this texture in this rock. I mean, that's working really well. That glossiness and the black and white works really well with it. You've probably sort of like eliminated a whole lot of weird color issues by going black and white. Yeah, so maybe a smidge of a crop off the top. But the fundamental problem with this image is that there's the haloing around the edge of the rock line, especially where it intersects with over the clouds. So I'll just point it out on one, and it's obviously happening over on the other one there. And if that can be sorted out and resubmitted, yeah, I think it'll go further. Just because of the texture and the detail in those rocks is absolutely amazing. And yeah, it wants to fly, this one, but just needs that little technical issue sorted out. Okay. Okay, so light across the sand. Okay, the light's well captured in this image, and the composition's almost there, but it needs possibly a foreground element or something, you know, maybe playing around with those ripples in the sand. I know you've got this sort of, you've got a few footsteps here. I don't think they've been utilized as much as what they could have been to sort of like create a lead you in and through the image. I mean, like, it's beautiful light in this shot, and it's just sort of like struggling for just needing something to help it, just to lift it a little bit. And I think just playing around with that foreground element of, you may go, oh man, somebody's walked through my bloody shot. But then you could, well, just use the footsteps and possibly use that, change the angle a slight a bit, and use them as opposed to sort of there just being something in the sort of like the mid-ground, not really doing much. You could possibly lose a little bit off the top, but it's not really going to help too much more. Okay, let me just take a little bit of a drink here. Right. Okay, Glenorchy by Moonlight. Okay, another shot that you sort of like want to like because just because of the difficult situation it is to photograph. Okay, and it's amazing how much light you do get with reflected moonlight. So the exposure's been really well handled in this, and considering those difficult lighting conditions, or shooting under the moonlight. And I just found the composition a little bit sort of unresolved, a little bit sort of, here's some trees with a few reflections, but it's sort of like, are we photographing the trees with the reflections, or what's going on with the space out to the left with the mountains and the village or whatever? I think the photographer is sort of like trying to capture too much and didn't really know what to concentrate in on, and has managed to sort of just leave us sort of like wandering around the image a little bit. And yeah, so just make a bit of a decision about what you're photographing. I mean, and you've got the real night scene happening on one side, and then of course the other side's clouded over. So, I mean, it's almost like two different images in the same shot. So, yeah, make a decision about what you're actually photographing. And I know that at night it's very hard to sort of like see your compositions and stuff like that. Possibly a vertical, I even thought in this shot would sort of utilize going up and shooting the trees and the stars a little bit more. Yeah. Okay. All right. Another image to be to have just a few tweaks and then resubmitted, because obviously it's a spectacular location, great sunrise. Yes, sunrise should, and well captured on that manner. But it just overall it looks a little bit flat. Once again, I think your projector up here is doing it some favors, but in real life, on the monitors, it looks a little bit flat on the foreground rocks here, and it just needs to be lifted a bit. Just give it a little bit of, just lighten it up a little bit, and just have a little bit more balance. I mean, it just really did look quite flat and dead on those foreground rocks, and yeah, just needed a little bit of a lift. Once that's done, should be fine. Do you crop a little bit off the bottom? I did sort of like wonder about that, through here maybe. One of the things you have to have a bit of a play around with. Okay, so fantastic S-curve. Geez almighty. So score well for the S-curve, but it's leading. Where's it leading the viewer? Sort of like to nowhere. Sort of like sort of almost wants it leading somewhere, and that can be a problem. I mean, like you can have a fantastic sort of like compositional element, but it's sort of like it just sort of like leads over the hill and we're sort of like just left there. We sort of like wander back down looking for something else. But yeah, it's a hard one because I mean like the S-curve is quite dramatic and makes you want to go and photograph it, but it sort of has to have something else. You have to go, has to lead you somewhere, has to tell a bit more of a story. Okay, the light was a little bit flat on it too. But that's, to me, it looks like it's probably the time of the day that has done that, or the type of the day. It looks quite overcast. Okay, so yep, all I've written there is it just needs something else, just one more bit. Right, okay, Lake Huron, bit of intentional camera movement here. Speak clearly. The level of movement is just right. The tones and colours work well. The ripple detail in the foreground is intriguing. I'd probably like to have seen it marginally wider or cropped more panoramic. The format didn't sort of suit the horizontal blur, I felt. It could have. It really sort of like, to me, felt like it needed to go a little bit more panoramic in its crop. Once again, I mean, like that's something that could be applied and reapplied. Okay, so. The road leads us through nicely. We've got a building to stop at on the way through, and we sort of like go down through on a bit of a journey on this one. We've got a little place to stop and whatnot, which is quite nice. But the brightness levels on that top part of the image, the clearer sky, sort of are not quite, obviously it's going to be brighter up there, but I mean like it's sort of like the brightness levels in the foreground don't sort of meet or match or the top half. They sort of like they're two different images. And I think possibly if you lightened up the road a little bit or the lower half, just a smidge, not too much, just a smidge, or pulled the brightness of the, especially that sort of like that left-hand top area down just a smidge. It might help it out a little bit. just that bright area in the sky, particularly that top left, is you just end up going there, and you want to spend a bit more time on your journey. Okay. Sorry, lost the button. Okay, break of day at Lake Matheson. Okay, so well captured image of this well-known location. Interesting light and reflection, but may have been done, or may have been made better with vertical framing. Okay. Actually, your projector's sort of like doing it a bit of a disservice now, because there is a little bit more reflection and whatnot in that foreground, in the water. And as I said, going a vertical might help a little bit more with playing around with that reflection. It's got a bit of a painterly effect about it. Feels a little bit, the composition feels a little bit unbalanced. There's too much dark trees on the left-hand side, possibly not enough on the right-hand side. So if there's another image, maybe that could be corrected, or it could be cropped to help that balancing out a little bit. And yeah, so just have a think about those couple of things. But yeah, nice light. Interesting weather. Okay, so once again, an image that I really wanted to like just because it's an interesting location, but there's a few problems. The road cuts it in half, and the viewer follows it, walks straight out of the image, forgets to go to the mountains. The foreground tyre tracks are a little bit distracting, indicate possibly that the photographer's just got out of the vehicle and just sort of like photographed what they've seen. Colour balance is a bit cool, even though, I know that it's winter, you can see there's snow, but the overall colour balance is too blue and could be corrected. And possibly the composition is a little bit skew if the photographer had gone just like a little bit down that way. That big Joshua tree would have possibly not been sort of intersecting the mountain so much. You could have put it almost in the valley, or a little bit more in this sort of, this arc here. So, or where, along a little bit. So, yeah, there's a few things there that may be correctable. Especially the colour balance, that can certainly be corrected a bit. Maybe even cropping in a little bit tighter could help it out. Okay. All right. 3. That's a good thing, isn't it? 3. Yeah. All right. Floating in the cloud. Okay. We see these mountain vignettes all the time, and often we don't really photograph them. You're driving along, oh, look at that, that's lovely. The photographer's done well to sort of like go and capture that. It's interesting light, little bits of light, and warm light, little bits of light. Yeah, lovely. They just sort of like lift it a little bit. Just having that, the color of the color balance and just having that sort of specular light in there is really helps it out. If it had been flat light, it would have flopped. So yeah, it's just having light makes a hell of a difference. Okay, so well done. Well done for stopping and getting the camera out and actually shooting it, because we've all seen scenes like this, but often we sort of like just walk past them. All right, okay, Pukaki Storm. All right, not an unfamiliar scene in the Mackenzie, well exposed, and probably the only, let me read it first. So possibly you could argue that you might want to crop a little bit off the top, to sort of like try and get rid of that real bright spot at the top right. And also, manage the highlights in the water a little bit more. But I mean, like, it's just got lovely depth about it and layers with that weather coming through, and been reasonably well captured. And so, sort of like thought that needed a bit of a pat on the back. And interesting light, interesting weather, interesting photo. Well done. All right, so this is a nice composition, and the exposure in a very high key scene is well controlled, and nice sort of balancing of the natural light with the one man-made light source in the shot. Sort of like well-controlled image as far as like the snowy conditions. They can often sort of like get a bit tricky, as we've already seen, and so sort of rewarded for that fact. And as I said, that composition's quite nice with the tree sort of like placed quite nicely in that gap, and then the church on this side. You could argue that sort of like you maybe chop a little bit off the bottom there. Is this water in the foreground really necessary? I'll sort of let that go for the composition and the control and the lighting conditions. Okay, Lake Huron. Crikey. It's very reflective. Okay, another spectacular reflection shot of a spectacular location, which actually benefits from that centralized sort of like composition. Reflections often you can get away with a real nice centralized composition, and this one it's worked quite nicely. Once again, just a couple of little words of warning, not enough to pull it back because it has been very well handled as far as the exposure, etc. is concerned, but just be careful of how much sharpening is applied. It's right on the edge of being too much through the shot, and also that saturation in the sky. Once again, it's, I was in the camp of sort of like, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt because the rest of the image is just so spectacular. But be careful with how much saturation you apply to things like that. Yeah. Okay. All right, here's another reflection shot. Maybe I saw the other one first because I don't, the other one said, well, another reflection shot. Story of two halves, before and after the weather. So, you've got that sort of like, and how many times you've been on the West Coast and it's sort of like, you look one way and it's like, it's raining and crappy, and then the other way it's like blue sky. I was in Fiordland the other day and it was like exactly the same scenario. You turn one way and it's one conditions, and then it's the other way, the other conditions. You get that whole thing. But the fact that it's been shot with a wide angle and you're just getting this leading you through and in, and you go in and in and in and in, and you sort of like keep exploring. You go from this cloudiness here and you sort of like go in and you sort of like end up over in the background there. And the wide angle works really well. It's sort of like it's creating that sort of, that drawing you in effect. So, it's... I'm hesitant at times for a really wide angle, a really panoramic shot like this, but I think it's worked all right. Okay, last light. I love portraits of mountains. And this is just one of those things that you see, that just that last skimming light floating across the image. Once again, it's light. Okay, so that's the thing, those that did not scored so well, look at the ones that are scoring a bit better, and the light is, it's starting to, that's where a lot of it's happening. And so, you're just getting that light skimming across, nice warm tones, a little bit of shadow, a little bit of highlight, and the warm tones of the foreground contrast nicely against those bluish tones of the background or the sky. It's just like a lovely little shot. Not too much more you could do with it. Well captured. All right, after the rain, I don't know about you, but I mean, I've seen this scene a gazillion times, don't really photograph it, but sort of like really do see it at times. Post-rain, walking through the bush, look up around the peaks, and you get this broken cloud, waterfalls, floating atmospheric stuff. The photographer's done really well to sort of like capture this. The projector here is overcooking the highlights a little bit, but in the actual image, the highlights are actually retained quite nicely. The tonal range, once again, it's not quite bang on the projector here. It's sort of like it's got a really quite nice tonal range or color palette through it. And it just felt really sort of reminiscent of a gazillion walks through the New Zealand bush that I'm sure that we've all done. So, well done. Okay, score of 4, landscape in the sky. Very interesting, intriguing image of a cloudscape that looks like shadowy hills. Okay, really did make me look twice, which was good. If you intrigue the viewer, if you make them look more than once. If they have to sort of interpret it, that's a good thing. Photographer's done well here with the image and purposely underexposed a little bit to create that image, or that sense of hills. And so thank you for the photographer for presenting this to us and showing us quite a unique, interesting image. It's very nice. Rightio. Okay, so sometimes you just have to like an image just for the simplicity of it and the how well it works. And this is one of those. Very difficult to pull this type of image off. Sometimes the most simplistic images are very difficult to create because they're actually more difficult than what they seem. The color palette is beautiful. Once again, I think your projector's overcooking it a little bit, but on the original, the color palette is just lovely tones of warm tones, the scattered red and white. It's up for debate about those foreground flowers and the out of focusness or the level of out of focusness, and do you want more or less and stuff like that. But it's got a real nice sort of like feel about it, and a simple image that sort of like works really well. I mean, like if you were to do anything, do you pull off a few of those ones in the immediate foreground that sort of like eliminate that one that's in the bottom right? Bottom left. Yeah, it's but anyway, it's still really well done. So nice one. All right, so cracking reflection shot. Sunrise at the boat shed. All right, not much more the photographer could have done with this image. Color is great, reflection is perfect, composition is spot on, and including even like the positioning of those piles. I mean, like this is like the details. Photographers at the elevation that the piles, I'll point them out. The top of these piles, they don't go into the ground. You've got like a little bit of separation by this, just a slither of water on most of them, to just create that depth into the image. If the photographer was down just a smidge lower, they would merge, or the tops of those would merge into the background land there, and it wouldn't have that level of separation. Creates that depth within the image. Really nice. And my only personal want is maybe get a little bit of the top of the cloud and the bottom of the reflection. So that's a personal thing. I'm not going to pull it back on that. Yeah, really well done. Okay, this is nice sort of intentional camera movement shot, beautifully done. The color palette once again, and this is really nice. It's the tones within it work really well, but you've got this sort of like the earthy feeling, earthy colors down the bottom. Obviously, the sky above. And the clouds, sort of like all the ghostly shapes and whatnot sort of like work really well together. And you've got even the ghostly shapes of the trees and stuff as you look a little bit closer, a little bit harder at it. So it's got a few details in there that sort of like make you look a little bit more. And yeah, but that overlaying sort of like the color palette in it was just superb. And when you look at an unprojected version of it like that, it's it's got just a really, the color palette is beautiful. Yeah. Okay, nice. All right, Veins of the Earth. This subject suits black and white perfectly. The texture on those tree roots is brought out by the black and white. Composition is also spot on. Okay, it works really nicely with this. And if you to look at not that version up there, but this version, it's the level of detail through the shot is amazing and really nice. Probably the only thing that I pulled it back on a little bit was the vignettes on it being a little bit dark, especially down the bottom, a little bit obvious. But that's a small thing. It's been quite well handled. Okay. Okay, Mackenzie Country. Photographer's done really well with this one. The composition works really quite nicely. We've obviously got the layering and the sort of like everything's leading in through the middle. It could have done with, one thing in the middle, a horse, a guy on a horse or something, but you can't, that's that's aside. I mean, I've given it a 4 or something already, so, it's doing well as it is. It's a landscape shot. The tonal balance, once again, or the tones and the color balance work really nicely in the original, and that, it just sort of like, it's just dreamy and just nice, warm. It's got enough sort of like separation going through that you sort of like, you can see the layering in the image. There's little highlights on that mountain on the sort of like on the left mid-ground, and yeah, it just sort of like, there's just enough highlights and shadows and stuff like that to just keep you moving through. The clouds, once again, separating that out. As I said, the projector up here is sort of killing it a little bit. And yeah, so it just works really well, and well done to the photographer. Okay, so obviously not the easiest thing to photograph, and the photographer's done a pretty good job of it. The foreground, the problem that we always have when we're shooting sort of like night skies and aurora is our foreground. Done well with the water because it adds a little bit of interest into this foreground area. It's sort of like, finding that next step up as far as foregrounds are concerned when you're doing this sort of thing to sort of like really take the image to the next level. And it's a difficult one, I appreciate that. But the photographer's still done really well as far as like the exposure of this image, the having a bit of detail in it, having that silhouetted sort of hill through it, and so really well handled. It's just to get these to the next level, they just really, and it's forever difficult, is finding that perfect sort of like foreground element that sort of just brings it all together. But it's still a very lovely image. Yeah. Oh, score of 5. That's good, isn't it? The first thing I wrote was, wow. All right, if I think this is where it is, I think it is. Photographers done very well to turn their back on a much better known scene behind them and capture this moment. If this is where I think it is, which it might be. But anyway, this is amazing. I mean, like, geez almighty. That capture of that rainbow is, I mean, like, just to actually turn around and see it for the first thing, and then actually go, right, and then capturing it. I actually really like the composition with the path, the shadow of what is behind the photographer painted onto the hill via shadow. Then you got the highlight, then you got the rainbow. The saturation could have gone all haywire in this, but the photographer's done really well at retaining it, retaining a really nice sort of tonal range through it. Pay no attention to what the projector's doing. The viewed image is much nicer. Not much else the photographer could have done to this to add to it. I mean, but they've handled the scene and the situation really well. And so, yeah, hats off to you. Well done. Right. Okay, so, geez, I've written a novel here. So, obviously, I mean, like that previous one, we were getting into the nitty-gritty of the very few problems to be found in these images, and also these ones that scored 5 in the final image. You know, it was a hair's breadth between them all. So very few problems to be found with this. Black and white is obviously proven to work well with these long exposure, landscape type images, and this is no exception. The tonal range in the original is absolutely superb. It's beautiful. There's no highlights blowing out, which can really happen at times when you're doing this type of stuff. Well controlled. And you know, the only personal thing that I might have thought was sort of like maybe trying a square crop, but hey, that's just a personal thing. But the lead of the rock in the foreground here sort of mirrors the mountain in the background. You get the wide angleness, sort of like creating a leading line with the clouds. The clouds were luckily moving either towards or away from the photographer, creating that effect. Yeah, so it's beautifully captured, or very well done for this type of photo. Yeah, and the photographer needs a good pat on the back. Yeah, lovely. Rightio, we're getting down to the last few here. All right, so familiar subject to many of us, I'm sure. And I think this is very well executed as far as the exposure is spot on at this time of the day. There's enough light in the foreground and in the sky. The reflection is bang on. Let me read what else I've got. Yeah, the ice adds another layer of interest in the foreground here. You've got the rock, obviously, sort of like leading you in. I've gone off note here a little bit. My personal want maybe is sort of like maybe just if the photographer had moved across and moved up a smidge and got the top of the mountain, but I have to consider, that would have meant that this may have intersected the rock and stuff like that. So I just have to take it on belief that the photographer played around with those ideas and made a decision on that. Yeah, so just really well handled as far as this type of image is concerned, and So the photographer needs to be rewarded for that. Okay. Did I miss anything? No, I don't think I did. All right. So, God, I kept coming back to this image. Geez, backwards, forwards. Play for the score, backwards, forwards. But it just sort of like, you know, the pier is sort of like one of those things that's so difficult to photograph and so difficult to do something interesting with. And, you know, we've all been down there and we've all seen the fishermen fishing. But, you know, I think the photographer's done really well at capturing this shot. And I'll just like try and keep to my notes here so I can sort of like read off a couple of things that just to sort of like point it out. First of all, the exposure's bang on. Even through the highlight area on the original, there's detail. So composition works beautifully with those angles of the lines. Okay, the position of that basket is like, well, it's just like perfect mid-swing. Okay, you got the lines leading down and up. Okay, you got the silhouetted shapes of the fishermen, especially that one on the, you know, like there's two of them there, but there's one that's quite dominant. The cropping the cloud right to the corner, beautiful. Okay, seagulls, bit hard for some to see maybe. One here, not sure what that is. That one there, position themselves perfectly. Okay, and even got the seagulls to cooperate nicely, lovely. There's nothing else that could have been done to this. The crop is not, it's a square crop or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's good, it's perfect. Well done. Yeah, bringing something extra or something different to it. Yeah, good work. Okay. Rightio. Okay, another very well known shot. Exposure once again has been perfectly executed. Okay, which can be difficult at times. You know, the light's coming up really quick, or you know, it's coming bright really quick. Possibly the only thing that people will debate about, and there'll be some for, some against, is these foreground grasses. I was sort of like, I'm still a little bit either way on it, but you know, the original here, it's got lovely tone through it. The projector's killing it a little bit. The tone on the original is, the exposure is held beautifully throughout the image, as is the tone of the warm tones through it. And, you know, the photographer's done well to, you know, capture this sort of like bucket list type photograph. So, yeah, well done on that. Okay. Drum roll. I'm back. Dennis Chang. Dawn Kirk.
High acceptance, by the way.
Oh, high acceptance. Yes, congratulations. I'm supposed to be, okay. High acceptance, Nicole Jackson. Yeah. High acceptance for Veins of the Earth by Alistair Phillips. Mackenzie Country, Irene Ferguson. Yeah. The Aurora by Mike White. High acceptance. Okay, and honours with the Dawn Rainbow, Janine Money. Okay, honours Big Ben, Peter Dunbar. Tasman Lake honours JK.
Have fun with this one. He's not here though. Fritz off Morrison.
Okay, honours to Fritz on Morrison.
Yes.
Okay. Who's not here? Okay, Taranaki. And that's an honours to Paul Williams. And, okay, honours and best in show, Simply Grasped by Diane Keesley. Yeah, lovely.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you.
No problem.
I'd just like to thank Paul for his time. I'll give him an appreciation.
You're hanging on to that for a reason. Is it working? No? Oh, yeah. Wow, I didn't think I was any good at landscapes, but clearly not the big picture, just the little picture. So, but thank you. That was much appreciated, and I think we all enjoyed the images tonight. There were some absolutely stunning ones there. And thank you again, Paul, for your critique. Now, just a little bit more information on competitions that are coming up. The AV competition closes on the 4th of May, so if anybody's working on theirs, they need to sort of keep that date in mind. 18th of May, there's a projected image photojournalism is the subject. So if anybody's working on that as well. We have tonight, the open projected image 4 is closing by midnight. So if you still haven't got your entries in, don't leave it to the last minute. What else have we got? Next week, 7 o'clock, we have print matting by John Smith. I don't know if is he a club member or is that somebody coming in? Yeah, John Smith. So we look forward to that at 7 o'clock in the other room. And 8 o'clock, we've got an Australian photographer whom I actually know, Seng Ma. He's in Perth. I've been on some tours with him and workshops with him, and he's a really good, excellent educator within photography with many areas of skill. So hopefully, I don't know what he's doing, so hopefully we'll all enjoy his presentation, and he'll be doing that with a Zoom session. Is that correct? Yeah. Finally, there are some magazines down on the stage here donated by Ron tonight. They're from the Royal Photographic Society journals. If you'd like to take help yourself. Don't take them all. Try and just take one if you can, or maybe arrange to share with other people. That would be great. Any other business that anybody would like to say tonight? No? Well, firstly, I will thank, before we go, I'll thank, is it Andrew and Gordon up at the back, Alistair, on lighting and sound, and, sorry, my voice is a bit dry tonight, and Alistair on projection. Is that correct? Anybody else I've missed? I don't know who did the opening and closing, so I missed that. Thank you, Dennis. And just drive safely. We're doing supper? No supper. Not yet. Are we still collecting names, John? Oh, it is on. Okay. In which case we have supper next door. And I'll see you all next week. Have a nice evening. Thank you.